Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela Cárdenas, Project Manager for Strada Education Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us here today, where we are discussing the great work that some of our states are doing in our key focus areas. This will be a TED-style presentation, so I will introduce Mike. He will present for a few minutes, and then Courtney will go, and then we will open up the floor to your questions. We would love for this to be a more interactive session. Nobody wants to be talked at for another hour today, so we are really hoping for your participation today. Mike, just a few things about you so that everybody can get to know you better. Mike Meotti currently serves as the Executive Director for the Washington Student Achievement Council. You're on the Executive Committee of the State of Higher Education Executive Officers Association, so SHEO. And you're currently the commissioner for the Education Commission of the States, as well as the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. Did I get all that right? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So I lead the Washington State Achievement Council. It is the most unusually named state higher education agency in the country. There are many people who hear that and think, is that a nonprofit or whatever? But I used to be the commissioner of higher education in the state of Connecticut. Same kind of thing. Even though in each state that has some form of Department of Higher Education, we look a little bit differently in what we do. And I serve in the governor's executive cabinet as well. So we're the state, right? And that's important because my first point, I'm going to go through some of the points that speak to the high strategic perspectives that shape our work, right? And that is, number one, only the state really owns scale as responsibility. And I don't mean that as a turf thing, like keep people away, because there are many allies in the effort to achieve scale. But if a state government is not thinking about scale, right? In other words, the percentage of all state residents who are X, fill in the blank, whatever it is, in higher education or career or earnings or housing or whatever. And so that's why the Strada State Opportunity Index is so important, because it gives us a deeper understanding of measurements of scale than the traditional ones that were in our world were mostly about credential acquisition, right? And so it points out some really fascinating things like the challenges of earnings for many people who actually do receive a baccalaureate, but could be doing much better economically, and how do we respond to that and deal with that? The second thing, beyond scale, we then realize if we want to drive scale in a system, what do you do after high school, or what do you do when you're 25 or 35? You're not sure if things are working for you career-wise and economically. That world has really had a dominant model that sort of went flatlining after the 1990s in the country, where most of the indicators about going on and continuing or gaining post-high school credentials, you don't see a huge amount of change at scale in most states or the country in the last 20 to 25 years. So we think in order to change that, when you want to change a dominant model, you got to get to some really root cause things. And we think it's mostly about behavior, right? Which means it's not just about an information gap. Oh, if I tell you something, if I tell you about Washington's incredibly generous state financial aid program, thousands of students will rise up out of their seats, we're talking the traditional model 12th graders, and rush off to the local closest institution, at the end of 12th grade. It just doesn't happen that way, right? If you look at most initiatives, our incredibly generous program, all the other initiatives around the country that we've talked about for so many years, if you look for sustained change over a long period of time, you don't see it, right? And that's because we have to change the behavior, not just the programs and trappings and things around the edges of it. And recognize it's a lot more than outreach and information gap analysis and all that kind of stuff can change. To do behavior change, you got to get local. One of the things I've said, it's really about, it's what is the experience, and I'm going to use the traditional model. Everything we do is we have a very strong adult and emerging adult pathways body of work. So we think of the 25-year-old, the 35-year-old, the 45-year-old. But what's the environment that surrounds you on the ground? What are you hearing in your home? What are you hearing in your neighborhood? What are you hearing in your school? What do you hear if you have a part-time job when you're a teenager about people like you and whether or not people like you do things? And also, what are you hearing hearing about these other types of jobs that are not the standard model of go on to the community college or go on to the state university. It's that local environment. We are investing in certain partnership grants to multi-sector groups on the ground in different parts of the state to try to solve for that, because it's a challenge. You can't drive change on the ground in behavior by state laws or state budgets. You sort of become infrastructure, which I'll get back to, in a minute. If you're going to reach the local environment, you have to listen to the local voices. We've invested money in our own qualitative work as well as some of our partners' funding work, and you hear students and young adults talking about their view of the pathways in front of them. It really sort of wakes you up and reminds me, once again, in the work I've done, social human services work as well as K-12 education, higher education policy work, it is a huge mistake to assume these people we're trying to help don't really know enough. They don't know what they're doing, right? If only we gave them more information, they would make other choices. And you listen to the local voices and you realize, no, number one, they are reacting to what they feel and sense and hear in their environment. They are not making irrational decisions. We have to figure out how to change that equation for them. One of the principles that we've sort of been driving our work on that came out of a conversation I had with some high school principals who were leaders statewide in that community a number of years ago was taking all this sort of thinking about the world and thinking about changing behaviors, not just behaviors of the students and residents, but also the systems around them and institutions and entities around them. Can we make continuing after high school as simple as going from middle school to high school, right? Now that's just a very basic statement of can we make that transition, which is not a transition with no complication when you're in 7th, 8th, or 9th grade, whenever you would make that transition. There are issues to be dealt with, but you're not there thinking about, can my family pay for this, right? You're not there thinking, am I good enough to go to high school, right? And so we're deploying policies as state infrastructure, such as in January, this coming January, our state financial aid program essentially becomes a need-based free college program. If your family's in the SNAP program, you have tuition and most fees paid at every public institution, community college or university in the state. And we're also working closely with the institutions on understanding how to do guaranteed admissions and pull it all together in a message that people understand that we're not just talking about those institutions that are known to be selective. We're also talking about the community colleges, apprenticeships, and all the rest. If there's a place for you, and here's your way to go about getting it.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, Courtney. Courtney Taylor is the executive director for AccelerateMS, working to bolster Mississippi's workforce initiatives alongside other key stakeholders. You've also worked with several community colleges to enhance their workforce and economic development activities. Thank you so much for being here today, Courtney.
Thank you. I am happy to be here. I'm going to keep my phone so I don't get off on a tangent and then forget everything I wanted to say because I get excited. But I represent Accelerate Mississippi, which is our state's Office of Workforce Development. And it's important to understand a little bit about how we're structured so that you understand why I get to keep my job when I say the things that I say. But ultimately, I report to a board of private business and industry. And my office is a little over 5 years old now, 5 years and some change. We've been staffed for about 4.5 of those 5 years. We are a new office. It is a new focus on the mission, but is not a new request. And that's really important when I talk about the Career Coach Initiative, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But the things that we are doing are things that our business and industries asked existing government and education to do for a decade plus, and no one responded. So I say that to say if you are getting requests from your business and industry and not honoring them, be careful because you will get new government. And so I am new government, and I'm really proud to be here. I'm not here to help. I am here to cause chaos, and I am happy with that. So as we started, the main priority is to coordinate a very disjointed system, is to basically go in, what are the gaps, what can we close, what can we do differently, and move on to the next thing. We are not an education board. We are not an industry, formally an industry board. We kind of sit in between everything. One of the opportunities that came up really early was we needed better guidance for our high school kids. We have a system that's like everybody else's, where we have our K-12 has their check boxes, community colleges have their check boxes, and universities have their check boxes. And interestingly, almost none of them align. And so we said, you know what our kids need is access to opportunity, but they also need to understand the opportunity that's in their communities. Most people, and adults are no different than children. We all a lot of times talk about how, kids don't know what's in their community. Most adults don't either, because it exists behind some wall or some fence or some big white building. And companies are very good at selling their product to consumers, very bad traditionally at selling their opportunity to people who may want to work for them. If you don't believe me, go look at pretty much any company's website and try to figure out what type of jobs are in that company. It's very difficult. So in a very, what I think is a uniquely Mississippi thing, we said, why don't we set up a career coach program that is not housed within education? And it is really amazing, because the way it operates is our coaches directly work for our local workforce development areas. In most cases, we have 2 outliers that are economic development agencies. But that's really critical, because what we made the career coaches is essentially a local solution in education, which is really critical, because it's not the state sitting here saying, this is everything we need to do. The vision of this simply is that instead of a website or a piece of technology or a video guiding students, it's an actual human from their community that they may go to church with, they may see in the grocery store, all of those things. And that has made a really remarkable difference, I think, in more than just the students. So the students are helping because they know they have a dedicated person that they can just go ask questions to. So if you think back to your high school days, imagine if there was just one person when you had a career question that you knew to go to. You knew that I got to go talk to Courtney Taylor. Not a counselor that you've got to track down that's also doing 50 other things, or a teacher that's also managing bus duty. Their only responsibility was to serve this purpose for you. That's what our career coach program is. And it has its challenges. It has its wins. It has its things we've got to work on. But ultimately setting that aside and then giving those coaches the data that they need to be successful has been a really interesting engagement, I guess I should say. But what we've done in Mississippi is that exact thing. We are a state of about 3 million people, and we have 200 career coaches, which effectively puts one in every high school that has requested one. So just to give you a piece of the scale, because some of your states are very large. So that's kind of where we are. It is a piece of our workforce, our human capital infrastructure now. It is not a piece of our education infrastructure, even though it is layered within education. I regularly, and I don't get in trouble enough, I don't think, but I regularly talk about the inmates running the asylum. And what we didn't want to do was house this program somewhere where it got confusing, where we started making the coaches do, random, college and career readiness classes or bus duty or whatever. So we're really proud that we've been able to keep it separated from the infrastructure, but also the humans have incorporated it very, very well, so it is integrated. So when I talk about the disjointedness of our workforce system, having the coaches has really led to a truly integrated system that still has plenty of ways to go, I should say. But as it is being more integrated, what we are finding is that our economic developers are working with our coaches, who are working with our local workforce development boards. Some of you know the WIOA and the federal space. who are working with our local industries and really doing this together and figuring out how it works in that region and in that community, which is, I think, so much more valuable than me sitting in Jackson in the central, the state capital and saying, oh, this is a good idea. So I think it's really grown a lot of wins, and there's still some things we have to do. It ultimately, though, as we have worked with students, what we are trying to help them understand is it's not option A, it's not option B, it's just here are your options. When I came through school, that was not presented to me. I had a twin brother, and I was the one who was good at school. And so the community and the education system just loved me because, oh, this person's doing everything we want him to do. My twin brother was equally as intelligent. I think he was smarter than me. But he was a little bit of a problem child, and so he never found his foothold. And because he wasn't going to college, education did not know what to do with him. So that's kind of the ultimate problem that we're trying to solve with the career coaches is we need more students going into these fields of high quality, high value, high wages, high demand, and less of them going into fields that maybe don't have that need as much, or maybe don't pay as much or whatever. But if they do decide to go into one of those fields, they at least do it knowing their options. So there have been plenty of trials, plenty of tribulations, plenty of things that, I would look back at it now and say, oh, we should have done that differently. But I think the way we did it led us here and has allowed us to truly establish a program that is locally led, locally managed, but working together with the state as a whole. And when we get to the next step, I'd love to answer any questions y'all have about that.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So now we'd love to open up the floor to your questions.
So you started off by saying that schools had been asked to do this work and hadn't done it yet. Do you have any sense of what was getting in the way, what the challenges were that they weren't really fully embedding this kind of career preparation?
I think too heavy a reliance on what the feds ask for and not what locals ask for. And I think we have a habit in government and education of doing what we need to do to be good boys and girls and not what we need to do to serve the region. and that's unfortunate because I think we've built a little bit of a system that is very responsive, but to the wrong side of the equation. So it's and I say this in my existing role, if I were to roll out a memo that says you have to give me all of this information, everyone would just give it to me. There would be some whining and some complaining, and they would just give it to me. But if my industry said, I need these 3 things, they wouldn't be as adept at doing that. So I think we have to examine the command and control nature of how we've built these entities and what we're doing. I think we are managing a lot in education and government and not necessarily leading enough. And so I place that on the shoulders of the leaders, not necessarily the teachers, because the teachers are just teaching what they have to teach. So, but anyway, I think we're just being responsive to the wrong entities. Funding is a big portion of this, but I also think sometimes maybe if we stopped and said, well, let me just go repurpose this funding, whatever, I don't have to spend in a certain way, maybe I can do it differently. And then I think the sales pitches that are made in education, at least in the South where I'm from, it always goes back to money and not about purpose and outcomes. And I think we have to do more to drive what the outcomes are. And we're experiencing this even with our career coach program that I love dearly, but it's still really hard to wrangle. What are you producing? When are you producing? And how, so that you can keep that program going so it's not just another warm fuzzy where, oh, we feel really good about this and look how sweet these babies are, but maybe we're not actually producing what we think we are. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. Mike, I appreciated what you talked about with the behavior change piece, right? And how, inducing demand for education and training after high school isn't like a light switch, right? And so I wonder, on the behavior change piece, both in Washington and in Mississippi, what do you see as the tools or the signals that we need to be sending more clearly to students? What is the gap here in sending that signal to start that behavior change, to start inducing that demand for education and training after high school earlier?
Yeah, and I would reemphasize that the behaviors that need to change in order to change the likelihood of people to continue on these pathways is the behaviors of a lot more just the students, and it's not just, the students and their parents or their peers. It's also the attitude of classroom teachers. It's also the attitude of the community. It's the attitude of the people at the hardware store where somebody gets a job or whatever, where these assumptions are made about people. And the way that starts, there was a sort of a theme, what we were saying before, about you were sort of using the notion of who's in charge of the asylum, right? And I go back to, this city many, many years ago when I was an undergraduate here during the Vietnam War. And a saying that comes out of history. It was not created at that point in time, and I've forgotten now exactly who this comes from, whether it's Bismarck or someone else. Said, war is too important to be left to the generals, right? So I have, maybe particularly salient these days, but in any event, I've always had this parallel saying for many, many years, going back to K-12 involvement after Nation at Risk and all that kind of stuff, is education is too important to be left to educators, right? Because if you look across a sweep of American history, and this country has been at the forefront of changes in terms of access to education, universal, primary education and access to post-secondary education, is that those are really, in many ways, social movements. They are certainly not academic movements and not driven by educational leaders. So our regional challenge grants that we do are pretty much premised on the fact that in order to be eligible to apply, your partnership can't just be a school district and a nearby community college or university or something like that. Yes, those are going to be anchor partners, but you have to have community-based groups that know, and employers, if we can get them, you have to have other people in the community who are shaping, who believe in this vision, right? And realize the community must change, right? Because I lived through this enormous change in the post-war period, of which the societal attitudes around college going went from something where it was like for 3% of high school graduates to exploded, at least for my world in the Northeast where I grew up, was the children or grandchildren of European immigrants.
So I think culture is really hard, and it's an ongoing thing. You're never gonna stop trying to adjust and address culture. And I think the one thing I would caution is we don't need to change the culture of the children. We need to change the culture of the adults. And a lot of times, a lot of these initiatives try to fix a student or somehow help them or whatever. And I think who we actually need to be helping are the adults. And when the adults know better, they do better. And it's a really delicate balance of saying this is good without spending all of our time talking about how special and perfect we are. And then over here saying this is bad without spending all of our time talking about how horrible everything is. And there two things can be true at once. And so I think when we're talking about culture, everybody just needs to know that somebody has their back and is helping to guide this forward. And amen to everything you said, Mike. I think there's a lot of movement and a lot of room in what we're doing to address our inconsistencies without wallowing in them, as I would say where I'm from. But I also think there's an opportunity to just recognize that culture change is probably the hardest change you're ever going to do. I would say the biggest issue and the hardest thing we've had with Career Coaching Initiative and several other things is getting the governmental entities to not see it as a threat to their survival. And I think education right now is much in survival mode across the nation and has been since #COVID. So I think there's a lot of things that can impact that, but having a unifying vision, moving that direction, but also having people who can help block and tackle, really help people lean into this culture of change and this culture of accepting that it needs to be different. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's different.
Thanks. My question is for Courtney. Can you repeat the number of people that you hired for this? And then my next questions are, was it difficult to fill those positions, and what kind of qualifications were you looking for?
So we have 203 career coaches serving 209 schools. As you can imagine, we have some small schools in a rural state, so some career coaches do multiple jobs. Was it hard? Not for me, because we have 6 intermediaries, that grant recipients basically, that are running this program. Was it hard to find the people? Yes and no. We actually ended up initially with a lot of retired educators who are people who were about to retire because they work for private entities. They don't work for the state anymore at this point as career coaches. So yes, it was easy to find people who wanted to do this job. And there are many, many professionals who want to work in the school system, but they don't want to deal with the bureaucracy of school systems and the challenges and parents and all the things. And I think that's something that education should probably study a little bit more. But it was challenging to find people, and it remains a challenge, honestly, to educate the people who want to be in the schools working with the kids on the labor market. On the data that they need. Why does this data matter? And we've learned this the hard way. If you hand a series of Excel tables, which I am here for, you give me all the LMI you can give me and I will soak it up. But if you hand it to people who are good with little humans, probably not going to do a whole lot with it. And so getting the communication is still a major weakness of how do you get the information directly to the individual who needs it so that they can support the student in a way that they can take information in. That's a little bit, I think, different than what you asked, but I think it's an important piece. So you asked how many coaches, and then what was the last thing you asked? Do you remember? Qualifications. Oh, yes. The qualifications we kept them really generic of high school diploma. We searched and had our intermediaries worked really hard to try to find people that had some industry background. We did not require a college degree because we didn't want to continue to push that narrative that you have to go to college and that's the only success. And we really wanted some diversity and experiences in this. We do still have to wrangle expectations on who career coaches should be. The notion that you're going to pay somebody, in the mid $50,000 and you're going to get, an ex-industry executive is very flawed. And so finding people to do the Lord's work for that amount of money is really hard. But the qualifications were really zeroed in on similar to what you would be as a teacher, just an understanding of the system and a desire to work on it. And because we worked through the local intermediaries, they were able to vet people locally as to, oh yeah, this person, we had somebody that came from Enterprise Car Rental. We have a couple of people who are also preachers in their other lives. And so we have a really unique mix of individuals.
Can I follow on just a little bit? One of the most interesting things, about 8 years ago, there was a delegation from Washington led by our governor to Switzerland. And we looked at the Swiss model of how they do things that lead people, which is all about the experiences, the internships and other types of experiences that you have as a teenager building up to when you complete what we would call high school in order to prepare you for a career. We visited a local office in which it was an example of they do not do what we would call college and career counseling in the high school provided by high school staff. They do it in a completely separate entity that is part of their cantons, they're like counties or whatever. And that's all these offices do. They're both circuit riders, so they're not just sitting in their offices, but they do have offices. They also go out and do community events or community office hours, and they do go from school to school to school, which they do it. And I just think if you've been around the issue of counseling generally in the K-12 environment, which I was as I'm not an educator, but I was a policymaker, and you talk to school superintendents and others who have this vision about it's these models that I think we have to start looking at, because the K-12 environment, I would describe it as largely dominated by a culture of, can we get to Friday? There's just so much going on. There's so much pressure. There's so much this. Can we, especially with adolescents, can we get to Friday? And what you're going to do after high school is so far after Friday, we never get to it. And the counselors in the schools the counselors in the school, whatever we call them, used to be guidance counselors. My day now is school counselors. They are doing everything else that needs to get done by Friday, and they are not that focused on college. And secondly, even less on career counseling for those that are not a college-based pathway. And there's very little supports for them to understand the basic information that they need to do that job.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with that too. And I think industry has to own a lot of this also. I think one of the issues is we've put education at the fringes of our community and then complained that it's at the fringes of our community. We really are an interesting species. And so I think we have to do more to get industry involved. I know we have a new thing in Mississippi called Work Future where Scott Waller and his team are working to try to get industry to the table. And we're working to get this disjointed system kind of corrected, but we really need greater insights from industry, kind of to your point, to tell us, like, what are you looking for? When are you looking for it? And tell us very simply how we can work with our teachers, because a teacher can't be all things to all people, and that's kind of what we've asked for. So I think allowing a little bit more specialization. I can't stand it. I'm a farm girl, and I cannot stand a tool that does 50 different things. I just want it to do one thing really well. And so that's kind of the approach is we have to do 50 different things, but where we can just do one thing really well, where I can have a career coach that can be a specialist in the labor market and getting kids to post-secondary education and things like that, we want to do that. And we are seeing some results from this model. We do have some enhanced interest in CTE, career technical education in the post-secondary world, but now we got to have some additional capacity to be able to support that.
Hi, Michael Dannenberg with the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. My question is, should every public higher education graduate have to have a work-based learning experience as a requirement of their degree, ideally with a skill-based credential attached, or not? And if no, why not? And if yes, what are the conditions that states should embrace in order to make that vision a reality?
Well, it's good. I've known Michael for a while. That question was phrased very much as someone involved in education in Boston, the most academic city in the world. I always love that kind of structure. So yeah, yes, I think we need to have that, right? You shouldn't be able to graduate from high school or college in a science field and not have done lab work at least. Now that's not even a paid, right? Almost everybody who's in like you take some of the professional programs, everybody in the law school is doing some kind of work, right? In the actual legal world. My daughter's a fourth year medical school, and I actually spent some time learning when I was in Connecticut exactly how we train doctors, right? And how experiential. They don't get paid though, and that's one thing I'll say. She's fourth year. They don't get paid until they're residents, and then they're like underpaid. But yes, I think that's essential, because generally what I think education can do, both at the secondary and post-secondary level, is help you become a nimble and adaptable learner, right? And I don't care. I want that in my plumber, right? I want if I'm doing a renovation of my house, I want the plumber to be able to come in and say, I'm not just stuck in what I was trained in 20, 30 years ago. I have learned about new approaches to how we do this, that, or the other thing, and it's more water efficient, or it's going to require less maintenance or whatever, as opposed to I learned how to solder copper back 20 years ago, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. And you want that in everything. And so if the education or training program can help you gain that ability to be a nimble learner. If you then get into a work environment where you can start to understand what it means to apply that intellectual capability to actual work in a specific field, and touch and feel it, and sometimes realize, I don't want to do this. I want to go someplace else. Wonderful, especially that can be a low-cost experience for you to do it, rather than having taken out a student loan to go in a proprietary training program that doesn't work out. But yeah, I think that's important all along the way. Otherwise, you come out. I bet you if you look at, and again, this is where the State Opportunity Index is so important, the way it identifies a challenge that anyone who's been around had to know, that we had a substantial number of baccalaureate holding students who were way underemployed from what you think of as a college degree, right? And I will bet you would find a much greater concentration in that population than those who are getting the ROI on their baccalaureate. They had no exposure to work and the real world around them when they were getting that degree.
So I think yes, in principle, But I think we have to be very careful with, as soon as you say for everyone and required is a place that causes me a little bit of concern for a couple of reasons. Number one would be credential inflation. I think we have a lot of that right now. Number two would just be having a credential for the sake of a credential. And a state that I shall not name, I watched them, it was not the one I'm in right now, but I watched them come in with a credential attainment goal and say, oh, we're going to get all these people all these credentials, and a local school system had gone to getting, they were getting to count the barber side credential, which is cleaning barbering combs. And so it was a credential, and it was always said was that we needed more credentials. And so I think what states have to do is spend more time on credentials in what? What do we need more of, and not restricting it to national third-party credentials. I think that is, I trust my education system to create degrees that lead people to be electricians and plumbers and doctors and all these things. I can also trust them to create some short-term state-specific credentials where appropriate. But what we don't want to see, I think, is just more credentials for the sake of credentials, because then more is just more. And so we reach some predestined percentage, but maybe not in areas that we actually need. If we need 6,000 electricians, then we need to say that, and we need to be very specific about what credential aligns with that. In my opinion, and I think the point of work-based learning is 100%. Anytime we can get kids to work, we should, and our industry should be doing more in that regard. Requiring it, though, without an out is hard in a rural state like Mississippi, because we have counties with, just a couple thousand people in them that may not have a single industry where they could actually go to work. And so I think the requirement piece is hard. I think we have to get more people working. They need to be working earlier. Like, I jokingly say this, but like someone else needs to be yelling at your children, not just you, get somebody else to do this. But that's hard everywhere. And so I think that's part of where the local nature of this has to really kick in, and local communities have to care more than the state leaders. And so I think we need to spend a lot of time, the locals need to spend a lot of time driving that into their communities and figuring out what do they want and what do they need more of, and producing that and providing that, and then making sure the opportunity for all of those things is there for everyone, but not holding them back if they can't get it because of some access issue.
Yeah. And I just add to that I think that's, when I said before about you can't scale, at scale or systemically, you can't come out, we're going to plan to the Uber solution that will fix, which usually involves mandates, usually involves passing statutes, right, that aren't fully funded, right? So that's where I think it's so critical that whatever we do, you got to learn our way to it. But you start off the learning with a potential, strategic or policy goal out there that says, we think everyone should have. How do we start to doing more and more and more of it with eager, out-of-the-box partners to show how it works, how it can work better, and how it can scale?
I really like learn our way to it. I'm going to use that, Scott.
Hi, my name is Omar. I'm from the Washington Student Achievement Council. Happy to work with Mike as well. I have a question on your point on scale. I loved when you mentioned that governments, like state governments, responsible for driving scale. How do you balance prioritizing localized interventions when sometimes budgeting priorities are more towards these larger programs or like these one-size-fits-all policies?
Yeah, that's one, and we're welcoming Omar. Omar is our newest employee at the Washington Student Achievement Council. Happens to live here in Washington, D.C., having just completed a master's program at Georgetown, but he will soon be a proud, evergreen state resident. I think that's one of the things, because I've thought about this a lot in many different public policy arenas, and one thing is to understand that there are very few examples in which government has been able to step up and create something at scale with significant scale to start with. And I think Social Security is one example of that, right? And then we followed on with Medicare, in which you made a huge public investment, right, aligned to a problem, and it usually involves passing money, like our financial aid program. Our financial aid program in Washington operates kind of at scale. It probably is just tilted too low towards the lower income. It reaches the bottom third of all state students on average, right? But it's an eligibility program. You meet the standards, you get it. Everyone in the state gets it. There's no arbitrary caps on how much funding is available a year. But you look across the sweep of government, right? There is only so much of that the government has the ability to afford. And if that's all you do, like Washington is a great example of a state where we are spending so much on the financial aid support, and we keep advocating for tiny investments to be like, I'm told by my staff who are much younger than I am, that the saying, the straw that stirs the drink, is an outdated term. But what I'm trying to say is, we spend over $500 million in financial aid in the state of Washington annually, right? So shouldn't we be spending $10, $15, $20 million, not just to advertise, promote it, but to engage students before 12th grade? And we're doing some of that. We've been running a chatbot tool that reaches out to everybody in free and reduced price lunch, including their parents and a number of other things. But how do you make sure you don't because if you just do the huge, massive dollar amount scale move, then you don't get the most out of it.
Yes, I completely agree. I think when you talk about scale and all of these kinds of things, is you're not going to do it at scale the first time. I also think you probably don't need to do it at scale the first time, and I think that's where politics often takes over, is saying, oh, we got to do this for everybody, and we actually probably don't. When we started the Career Coach program, we said, you have to opt in, and you still today as a school have to opt in. And it was available to the whole state, but we only had a quote, small amount of money. It was not a small amount of money. It was a good bit of money, but we only had enough for like 80 coaches, I guess, statewide. And we had schools that we were targeting because their legislators wanted us targeting them. And when we contacted them, they said, no, we're not interested. So we said, okay, and we moved on to the next school. No harm, no foul, but it became a local issue. And today, a lot of those schools are involved in it again. And I have schools today that I would say are probably going to drop out of the Career Coach program at some point. Some of them are doing it themselves, whatever. But I think when you talk about scale, you have to figure out what scale is appropriate and what problem are we solving. And what I see with a lot of policies and a lot of policy recommendations is they're not actually solving any problem. They're solving a good idea that somebody had. And so I think the discipline to solve a problem is really critical when we start talking about scale, because the challenges that we have in Jackson, which is our state capital and the only metro area in the state, is very different from the problems that we have and the challenges in Issaquena County, which doesn't even have its own school. So we have to be really, really disciplined in what does the scale need to be, and it's okay if it's not equal across the board, and that is a tough pill to swallow.
And I think states, when I talk about scale, I mean owning the result at scale. And of course, that's what the State Opportunity Index measures, right? I'm not concerned about the scale of the programmatic intervention, right? If you do want to, if you've learned your way to everybody should have this, then the state has to think about it. Doesn't mean the state has to do it either, right? But the most important thing is to own the result at scale. Somebody in every one of our states needs to be sitting there saying, hey, look at what the Strada Opportunity Index says about the earning power and ROI. Let's look in our own state and grapple with this issue. Like, we're all about access, and we're also kind of about completion. At least, other states are equally strong on complete. We're all about access. We're trying to build a completion agenda, but that's not enough because your work shows, and all of us sort of knew anyway, but your work documents in a way that you actually have a measure of results at scale, which drives conversation, innovation, thinking, response tests, whatever, pilots, whatever.
Can I ask Mike one quick question? Because I'm curious now. So, and this is not scripted, I'm sorry. When you talk about moving from access to completion to now opportunity, which you were just getting at, how do you manage that within the education world of just not being exhausted from, oh, now this is the next thing? Like, how do you motivate the system or even your staff to think through like why that opportunity piece matters?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I draw a lot on my experience with K-12, K-12 policy. Like I was elected a school board member, I was a state senator, very involved in things, and a long time ago in another state, not Washington, right? And it's sort of a question of like if you learn your way to it, right? And you're gonna have to help me. I got a little lost back in my history there when I said.
No, just thinking through if you're as a higher education board, we got to get people access, and we got.
And how not to wear people.
We've done that. What about the opportunity?
That's where the understand. That's why, and because I've said this in K-12 for 30 plus years. Once I got woken to this, is you can't expect all this to be done by schools. And you cannot expect all this to be done by post-secondary, right? Post-secondary. So what we need to do is be able to break things down because nobody really lives at the state level, right? I don't know if Shannon's here, but maybe Rhode Island does. I don't know. Delaware might. I'm being bad. I come from the tiny state of Connecticut, and even there, it's way too complex. But at a metro regional level, you can think about where do the people in our region who have baccalaureates, where are they coming out on this ROI scale? And then because there are going to be maybe other dynamics than just their, baccalaureate. Also getting to understanding behavior again is the behavior of 18 to 22, 23-year-olds can be very different than the behavior of a 27-year-old, right? So maybe the strategy on the ground is we need a set of short-term certificates that help make up for the missing things that the student didn't get, or with all due respect, they didn't pay too much attention to. Because I've actually had the anecdotal stories from people who are 30, 35 saying, I studied all this stuff in my baccalaureate program, and I came here to work like a business analyst between our financial aid people and our IT people and all this kind of stuff. And then I took this certificate program at the nearby community college on these exact same things, these data analytics and stuff like that. And now it really meant something to me, right? So there are ways to recover from, it's not like you have to do your baccalaureate all over again. No one's going to do that, right? But there are other ways, and they're going to be grounded in the region, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, and thank you for your participation. Thank you, everybody.